single decision can rewrite the entire map of your life. Elara, a young cartographer with an unyielding thirst for discovery, deliberately altered her official assignment. She abandoned the safe, known coastlines to trace the faint, forgotten river routes, whispered to lead to the lost city of Ethelgard. By the end of this story, you will uncover the secret of a city that chose to sleep beneath the earth to preserve its knowledge from a great cataclysm. Elara risked her position, her reputation, everything, for a chance to prove the legends true. She was chasing a place where history itself was waiting to be rewritten. What ancient truths lie buried, waiting for someone brave enough to find them? Where are you listening from right now, and what is the local time where you are? The fragile parchment felt like a secret heartbeat in her hands. Elara spent days in the archive's deepest corner, her world narrowed to the faded ink of a star chart that made no sense to anyone else. It was not a map of the sky as it is, but as it was meant to be seen from one specific point on the ground. The constellations were subtly wrong, their lines connecting in ways that defied conventional astronomy, until she realized they were not stars at all, but a code. Each marked point corresponded to a landmark on the earth, and together they traced a route leading to a narrow mountain pass that, according to her calculations, would only be fully illuminated and passable for a few hours on the autumn equinox. This was it, the first real, tangible proof that Ethelgard was not just a fireside tale. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a mix of exhilaration and sheer terror. She immediately began her preparations, gathering supplies under the guise of a routine boundary survey, and spending every spare moment studying the treacherous terrain of the sunken peaks. Her meticulous research paid off, cross-referencing the chart with old geological surveys to confirm the path's existence, a thin crack in the stone that most would dismiss as a shadow. But her sudden, intense focus did not go unnoticed. Master Kale, the head of the Cartographers Guild, was a man who valued order above all else. He saw the new fire in her eyes, the scrolls she hastily tucked away when he approached, and he began asking pointed questions about her supposed coastal surveys. Elara found herself weaving a web of lies, claiming fatigue, inventing complex tidal data that required extra study. Each falsehood felt like a stain on her integrity, a small betrayal of the guild's principles, and she knew a single misstep could see her expelled in disgrace. The weight of the secret became too heavy to carry alone. One evening, as the lamplight flickered across her cluttered desk, she made a choice. She sought out Riven, her only true friend, a skilled herbalist whose knowledge of the wildlands was unmatched. She trusted him with everything, showing him the coded chart and confessing her true quest. To her immense relief, he did not laugh or call her mad. His eyes, usually so calm, sparked with a shared sense of adventure, and he immediately agreed to guide her through the wilderness. This decision deepened their bond, transforming a solitary obsession into a shared purpose, but it also multiplied the stakes. Now, her failure would not only be her own disgrace, but would also bring ruin upon Riven, who was risking his own standing to help her. As they finalized their plans in her small workshop, a strange, unseasonal fog began to creep into the city. It slithered through the streets, thick and silent, until it blotted out the lights in the windows and smothered the stars above. The very heavens Elara needed to navigate by were suddenly gone, obscured by a chill mist that felt less like weather and more like a warning, as if the land itself was pushing back against those who sought its oldest secrets. The fog clung to the city like a shroud, but by dawn it had thinned to a memory. Elara and Riven left the cobbled streets behind, their steps quickening as they crossed into the wild. The air itself seemed to change, growing thick with the scent of damp earth and old leaves as they stood before the entrance to the Whispering Woods. The trees were ancient, their gnarled trunks leaning inwards as if sharing secrets, and the path ahead was a tunnel of shifting green shadows. Elara unrolled the star chart, her eyes darting between the coded constellations and the forest floor. The map was clear, but the woods were not. The path they had chosen just moments before now seemed to curve away, blocked by a thicket of thorny vines that had not been there a minute ago. This was no ordinary forest. It was a living, breathing labyrinth, and it was watching them. Every step forward felt like a negotiation. The ground underfoot was soft and yielding, swallowing the sound of their footsteps, until the only noise was the rustle of leaves that did not come from the wind. Strange, melodic whispers seemed to drift from the canopy, sometimes sounding like a forgotten language, other times like their own names spoken in a sigh. It was a test of spirit, a deliberate assault on their senses, designed to breed doubt and turn them back. Riven's knowledge of the wild was their anchor. He pointed out subtle signs, a moss growing only on the northern side of certain trees, the way a particular bird's call echoed differently off stone, helping Elara to constantly recalibrate their route against the deceptive guidance of the map. They moved in a tight partnership, his grounding in nature's true laws a counterpoint to her faith in celestial codes, their trust in one another becoming their only fixed point in the disorienting gloom. The forest presented them with a choice, a fork in the path that was not on any map. To the left, a wide, sun-dappled trail wound invitingly downhill. To the right, a narrow, dark passage dove between jagged rocks, choked with ominous-looking fungi that pulsed with a faint, sickly light. Every instinct for self-preservation screamed to take the easier route. But Elara remembered the texts, the descriptions of a trial by spirit that separated the worthy seeker from the merely curious. She looked from the welcoming path to the forbidding one, her heart thudding hard in her chest. This was not a test of navigation, but of conviction. With a deep breath, she pointed to the dark, dangerous-looking route. "I believe the legends," she said, her voice steady despite her fear. The true path is never the easy one. That single decision plunged them into a deeper silence, the whispering ceasing as if in respect. The difficult route led them upward, the air growing cold and still, until they broke through into a circular clearing. In its center stood a ring of monoliths, their surfaces worn smooth by centuries and carved with symbols that mirrored those on Elara's star chart. As they approached, the stone pillars began to hum, then glow with a soft, ethereal blue light that illuminated the entire clearing. The light coalesced at the center of the ring, revealing a previously hidden seam in the earth, a massive circular doorway of fitted stone, but their moment of triumph was cut short. From the shadows at the edge of the trees, figures emerged. They were tall and silent, their forms seeming to drink the light, and they stood perfectly still, blocking the way they had come. They were not retreating, and they were not advancing. They were simply waiting. The figures did not move, but the shadows around them deepened. They were the forest wardens, ancient guardians woven from the very silence of the woods. No weapon was raised, no threat uttered. Instead, one of them gestured with a long, slender hand toward the center of the stone circle, where a single, withered sapling stood, its branches brittle and gray. The message was clear. This was a trial, not of force, but of understanding. To restore the sapling was to prove their worth. To fail would mean becoming another part of the forest's endless, whispering labyrinth. Riven was the first to act, his herbalist's instincts taking over. He knelt, carefully examining the soil, the texture of the bark, the faint, sickly scent of decay. He identified a fungal blight at the roots and a lack of a specific mineral in the earth, his fingers tracing the plant's fragile form with a healer's touch. But this was no ordinary blight. As Riven worked, Elara turned her attention to the monoliths. The glowing glyphs were not just symbols of power. They were a language, a set of instructions. She saw sequences that mirrored celestial alignments and others that described a flow of energy through the earth. Her cartographer's mind, trained to see patterns in chaos, began to piece it together. This was not just about physical nourishment. The tree needed to be reconnected to the land's own hidden energy. Riven, she said, his name a soft command. The blight is a symptom, not the cause. The glyphs speak of a severed connection. We must mend the flow. Riven looked from her determined face to the silent wardens, then back to the dying sapling. He trusted her reading of the unseen as much as he trusted his own knowledge of the tangible world. Working in perfect harmony, he prepared a poultice from rare mosses and cleansing herbs to heal the physical decay, while Elara used the star chart to decipher the correct sequence of glyphs to touch. As her fingers brushed the final symbol, a pulse of energy flowed from the stones into the ground, converging on the sapling. For a terrifying moment, nothing happened. Then, a single vibrant green leaf unfurled from a dead branch. Another followed, and then another, until the entire tree shimmered with new life. A bud formed, swelled, and burst open, not with a flower, but with a soft, radiant light that filled the clearing. The forest wardens, who had been as still as statues, bowed their heads in a single, graceful motion. The one who had gestured before stepped forward and offered Elara a small, luminous seed that pulsed with a gentle, inner rhythm. Riven eyed it warily. "We do not know what that is," he cautioned. "It could be a burden as much as a gift," but Elara felt an undeniable pull toward the tiny object. "This is not a reward," she insisted, her voice filled with a new certainty. "It is a tool, a key for the path ahead." She accepted the seed, and as her fingers closed around its warmth, she felt a shift within herself. She was no longer just a cartographer following a map. She was a seeker of truths, a gatherer of relics necessary for a greater quest. The wardens did not speak, but a warning formed in their minds, clear and cold as mountain water. "You have passed the test of the woods, but your progress has stirred deeper shadows. What sleeps below does not welcome light." With that, they melted back into the trees, leaving the two companions alone. The massive stone doorway at the center of the circle was now fully open, revealing a steep, dark staircase that descended into the heart of the earth. A chill, ancient breath flowed upward from the darkness, and in Elara's hand, the luminous seed began to pulse with a quicker, more urgent rhythm. as if drawn by a powerful force, waiting for them deep below. The stone steps spiraled down into an impossible darkness, the air growing heavy with the smell of wet stone and ages of undisturbed silence. Elara held the luminous seed aloft, its gentle pulse casting a small, warm globe of light around them, just enough to reveal that they were descending into a cavern of staggering scale. The walls were not rough-hewn rock, but smooth, polished stone, covered in intricate murals. As they moved, the seed's light danced across the walls, illuminating a story painted in mineral dyes that still held their vibrant color. Elara stopped, her breath catching. She saw a thriving city of graceful spires bathed in sunlight, its people studying the stars and crafting beautiful, impossible things. Then came the cataclysm, depicted as a dark star tearing across the sky, followed by waves of fire and shaking earth. The final panel showed the city not being destroyed, but deliberately descending. Great engines carved into the mountain lowered the entire metropolis, its towers and libraries intact, into the waiting embrace of the earth. They chose this, Elara whispered, her voice swallowed by the immense space. They gave up the sun to save their knowledge. The murals confirmed it. Ethelgard was a city that had put itself to sleep, waiting for a time to reawaken. The realization settled on them with the weight of the mountain above. Their arrival here was not an accident. It might just be the sign the sleepers were waiting for. A low rumble vibrated through the stone under their feet, a reminder that this sanctuary was also a tomb, and a fragile one. Dust sifted down from the ceiling as a tremor passed through the caverns. They had to move, and quickly. The path ahead split into two tunnels. One was wide and clear, its floor worn smooth, suggesting it was a main thoroughfare, perhaps leading to safety or an exit. The other was narrow, its archway marked with a single, precise glyph that Elara recognized from the oldest scrolls in the archives, the mark of a master scholar. It was the path of knowledge, and it called to her. Riven looked at the unstable ceiling, then at her. "The main passage is safer," he said, his voice tight with tension. But Elara's eyes were fixed on the scholar's glyph. The entire purpose of this journey was to find the truth, not an escape route. "We follow the knowledge," she said, her decision firm. She stepped into the narrow tunnel, and Riven, after a final glance at the receding safety of the main path, followed. The tunnel opened abruptly into a chamber, so vast the seed's light could not reach its ceiling. It was a library, but unlike any ever dreamed of. Shelves carved from the living rock climbed into the shadows, holding not books, but crystal tablets that shimmered with captured light. In the center of the room, standing perfectly still in recessed alcoves, were figures of sleek, dark stone, their features elegant and severe. They were the city's guardians, silent and waiting. As Elara took a step forward to examine the nearest crystal tablet, a deep grinding sound echoed through the chamber. The entrance they had just come through sealed itself with a massive slab of rock, cutting off their retreat. They were trapped. The only light now was from the pulsing seed in Elara's hand. As she held it up, its rhythm quickened into a frantic, brilliant flare, washing the room in stark white light. In the sudden silence that followed, a soft, grinding scrape of stone on stone echoed through the library. One of the stone guardians in the nearest alcove slowly, impossibly, turned its head. Its eyes began to glow with a soft, piercing blue light, fixing directly on the two intruders, standing in the heart of the city's most sacred space. The stone guardian's head turned with the grating sound of ancient machinery, its luminous blue eyes pinning them in place. It stepped from its alcove, its movements fluid yet heavy, each footfall a dull thud that echoed through the silent library. Another guardian awoke, and then another, their forms emerging from the shadows until a half-circle of silent, advancing sentinels surrounded Elara and Riven. There was no malice in their stance, only a relentless, programmed purpose to remove the disturbance. Riven pulled Elara back, his eyes scanning for any gap in their closing ring. "They are not attacking," he said quickly. "They are hurting us. We cannot fight them. We have to outthink them." Elara's mind raced, her gaze darting from the advancing figures to the walls lined with crystalline knowledge. This was a library. Its defense would not be brute force, but a test of worthiness. She saw a raised dais against the far wall, its surface inset with a smooth, dark panel covered in the same elegant glyphs from the murals. "There," she said, pointing. "We need to reach that terminal." Dodging a guardian's sweeping stone arm, they darted between the monolithic figures, their movements a frantic dance in the pulsing light of the seed. Elara slid to her knees before the terminal, her fingers tracing the symbols. It was a language of logic and light, a dialect she had spent years studying in fragmented, misunderstood texts. The lead guardian was nearly upon them, its shadow falling over her. Riven stood his ground, placing himself between her and the automaton, not to fight, but to plead with his posture, to show they were not invaders. Elara's heart hammered as she pieced together the phrase, whispering the words as she input them. "We are seekers. We come for truth, not treasure." For a terrifying second, nothing happened. The guardian's hand was inches from Riven's shoulder. Then, the blue light in its eyes flickered. The glyphs on the terminal glowed a soft gold, and the automaton froze. Every guardian in the room halted simultaneously, their imposing forms settling back into a resting stance, their heads bowing slightly in a gesture of acknowledgement. The immediate threat was over, but the air remained charged. Riven let out a shaky breath. "We should go back, Elara. We have proven our intent. That is enough." But Elara looked at the now respectful guardians and felt a surge of conviction. "No," she said, her voice firm. "This was not a barrier. It was an invitation. We have passed their test. They are not standing down. They are standing ready." As if in response, the lead guardian turned and began to walk slowly toward a grand archway on the far side of the library. The other automatons fell into a formation behind it, becoming a silent honor guard. Yet their activation had a cost. The chamber's own ambient light, which had previously pulsed with a soft energy, dimmed significantly as they moved, whole sections of the library plunging into deep shadow, as if the guardians had drawn power from the very walls to animate. Their path was now a narrow corridor of light, through overwhelming darkness, guided by these stone figures from a forgotten age. The lead guardian stopped at the great archway and raised an arm, pointing into the cavern beyond. From that darkness came a sound, a deep, rhythmic humming that vibrated up through the soles of their feet, the steady heartbeat of the sleeping city. The grand archway opened into the heart of the mountain itself. Before them lay a cavern so vast its ceiling was lost in shadow, and at its center hung a massive crystalline heart. It was a lattice of pure, geometric light, though its pulse was faint and slow, a dim rhythm that echoed through the stone. This was the source of the city's long sleep, the engine of its preservation. Ancient scripts were carved into the floor around it, a circular warning written in a language Elara's heart understood before her mind could translate. To awaken the heart was to awaken the city, but it would also send a beacon into the world, a signal that could not be hidden from the ancient enemy, the force the texts named only as the Eclipse. The weight of the decision crushed the air from their lungs. This was not merely a discovery, it was a choice that could reshape the world. Elara felt the pull of a lifetime of yearning, the answer to every question she had ever asked now hanging silently before her. Riven stepped closer, his face pale in the dim, rhythmic light. "We cannot do this, Elara. We are not ready for this responsibility. Unveiling this city means making it a target. We would be unleashing the very danger it hid from. But how long should it hide?" Elara countered, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and fervor. "Knowledge locked away is not knowledge at all. It is a relic. The Eclipse is not gone, it is waiting. Hiding from it forever is not a solution, it is merely a slower form of defeat. The wisdom in this city could be the very thing that helps the world finally face that darkness." Their debate was a quiet, desperate thing in the monumental chamber, two small voices arguing over the fate of a sleeping giant. Riven spoke of prudence, of returning with more scholars, of preparing the world above for such a revelation. Elara spoke of courage, of seizing a moment that might not come again, of trusting that the city's guardians would not have led them here if the time was not right. She looked at the luminous seed in her hand, now pulsing in perfect sync with the great heart. It was not just a key, it was a catalyst. "I have to try," she said finally, her decision solidifying into action. She believed the risk of inaction was greater than the risk of action. With Riven's worried gaze upon her, she stepped onto the central dais. A single, perfect receptacle glowed at the base of the crystalline structure. Taking a final, steadying breath, she placed the seed into the slot. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, light erupted. It was not an explosion, but an awakening. A wave of pure, white energy surged from the heart, flowing through the crystalline lattice until it blazed like a captured star. The light shot through previously dark channels in the walls and floor, racing through the entire city. A deep, resonant hum filled the cavern, growing in volume until it was a physical vibration in the air. All around them, they could hear the sounds of a giant stirring, the groan of ancient machinery powering up, the chime of long silent systems returning to life. But with the light came a shadow. A section of the wall near the heart flickered and turned a harsh, warning red. A series of sharp, discordant chimes echoed through the chamber, and a new glyph appeared on the terminal, one they had not seen before, a symbol of a dark orb consuming a star. The alarm was unmistakable. The return of Ethelgard's power had been detected. The Eclipse now knew they were here. The warning glyph pulsed like a bleeding star. From the edges of the great chamber, the shadows themselves began to writhe, peeling away from the walls to form tall, wavering figures with no distinct features, only a chilling absence of light. These were the scouts of the Eclipse, and they moved with a silent, liquid hunger, drawn directly toward the blazing heart of the city. The stone guardians reacted instantly, their forms interposing between the shadowy entities and the crystal lattice, their own blue light clashing against the consuming darkness. It was not a battle of clashing steel, but of opposing forces, light against void. Elara and Riven were thrust into the chaos, their minds racing. They could not fight these things directly, but they quickly saw the shadows recoiled from the pure, focused energy of the Guardians and the heart itself. Riven, using his knowledge of terrain and disruption, began shouting suggestions, pointing out crystalline conduits in the floor that, when struck by a Guardian's fist, released a surge of light that forced the entities back. Elara, reading the frantic data now flashing across the central terminal, directed the automatons, identifying weak points in the shadowy advance. Together, they used the environment as their weapon, turning the chamber's own defensive architecture against the invaders. The first wave of scouts dissolved into dissipating mist, but the victory was hollow. The lead Guardian turned its luminous gaze to Elara, and a stream of information flooded her mind, not in words, but in concepts of distance, numbers, and imminent convergence. The Eclipse's main force was coming, a tide of darkness that would overwhelm their few defenders. They were not just outnumbered, they were a flickering candle in the path of a storm. Elara's quest for knowledge had now become a desperate fight for survival. "We cannot win a stand here," she said, her voice cutting through the humming alarm. "We need to raise the city's shields." The legend spoke of a chamber of echoes, the place where Ethelgard's original protective veil was woven. If we can reach it, we can reactivate it. She commanded the Guardians to hold the heart chamber and to initiate all remaining defensive protocols, buying them precious time. As she and Riven sprinted from the cavern, the city around them was a symphony of awakening and confusion. Lights flickered on in long dark towers and through crystalline viewports. They saw the forms of the city's slumbering citizens beginning to stir in their stasis pods, their faces etched with the disorientation of centuries. These people were the reason for everything, and they were awakening directly into a nightmare. The race was no longer just for truth, but for their very lives. The Chamber of Echoes was not the silent sanctuary they had imagined. Elara and Riven pushed through streets now flooded with light and confusion, past citizens stumbling from centuries of stasis, their faces masks of fear as the city's alarms wailed. The chamber itself was a high-domed room lined with thousands of perfectly cut, resonant crystals, all angled toward a central pedestal. But the heart of the system, the master crystal that should have focused the harmony, lay in glittering shards on the floor, destroyed by the tremors of reawakening, or perhaps by time itself. A wave of cold despair washed over Elara. They had found the city's only hope for a defense, and it was broken. The very air began to grow heavy and cold, a palpable darkness pressing in from outside the mountain, dimming the newly restored lights. They could hear the panic in the streets, rising to a fever pitch. There was no time to repair the physical instrument, no time for intricate engineering. Riven's mind, trained to find uses for every root and leaf, seized on a different kind of resource. He remembered an old tale his grandmother told, a legend of a heart song, a harmony so pure it could mend what was broken and shield what was vulnerable. "The city is alive with energy again," he urged, his voice tight with urgency. "The power is here, in the walls and the people. We do not need a new crystal. We need a new song." Elara understood instantly. This was not a problem for a cartographer or an engineer, but for a community. She turned from the shattered crystal and ran back into the chaotic thoroughfare, her voice cutting through the fear. She did not command them, she called to them. She spoke of the city's great sacrifice, of the knowledge they had preserved, and of the shadow that sought to extinguish it all. "We are not just awakening a city," she cried out. "We are defending a legacy. Your voice is the key. Your unity is the shield." One by one, the disoriented citizens quieted, their fear turning into a fragile, focused resolve. As the first few voices rose in a hesitant, ancient melody taught to them by their ancestors, something miraculous happened in the Chamber of Echoes. The thousands of wall crystals began to hum in sympathetic vibration, gathering the sound. Without a central focus, the light they produced was a chaotic, shimmering spray, but it was light nonetheless. A thin, wavering dome of energy began to flicker into existence over the city, a fragile web of sound and light. It solidified just as the first wave of the Eclipse's vanguard, a tide of pure, silent darkness, smashed against it. The dome held, but the impact sent painful, visible cracks webbing through its luminous fabric. The song had created a shield, but the true test of its strength was only beginning. The storm of darkness crashed against the dome in a silent, chilling wave. It was not a sound, but a pressure, a force that sought to smother the light and silence the song. Elara stood at the heart of the Chamber of Echoes, her mind a whirlwind of calculation. She watched the patterns of the assault, her cartographer's eye tracing the ebb and flow of the shadowy tide against their luminous shield. She began directing the citizens, not as a commander, but as a conductor, guiding groups to focus their harmonies where the dome was thinnest, using their collective voice to reinforce the weakening points. Riven and the Stone Guardians moved through the streets below, the automatons focusing their own energy to patch fractures while Riven helped exhausted singers, his presence a steadying anchor in the chaos. It was a battle of attrition, a test of spirit against an endless, whispering void. The Eclipse's assault was not just physical, it was psychological. Tendrils of shadow seeped through the barrier, not to attack, but to speak, hissing doubts directly into the minds of the singers. You are not enough. Your sacrifice is for nothing. The city will fall, and it will be your fault. The song began to waver as fear took root. The dome flickered, its light growing dim. Elara saw the despair on their faces, the exhaustion that threatened to break them. She knew they needed more than a strategy. They needed a reason to fight that was stronger than their fear. She climbed onto a central platform, her voice rising above the dissonance. She did not shout commands. She told them a story. She spoke of the cataclysm, of the brave choice their ancestors made to bury their home and sleep for centuries, all to protect the light of knowledge they now held. Your ancestors did not hide from the darkness, she called out, her words ringing through the chamber. They preserved a spark so that one day we could rekindle the fire. This struggle is not our burden, it is our legacy. We are the answer to their long vigil. Her words wove their present fear into the tapestry of their past, transforming a desperate defense into a sacred duty. A new strength flowed into the singers, their voices unified, the melody swelling with a power born of shared purpose. The dome solidified, its light burning brighter and more steadily than before, pushing the whispering shadows back from the city walls. For a glorious moment, it seemed they might hold, but the Eclipse was ancient and clever. Seeing its psychological assault fail, it gathered its entire, monstrous form into a single, concentrated spear of absolute darkness. It struck the dome with the force of a falling star. A deafening crack reverberated through the city, not of sound, but of splintering energy. A jagged fracture, dark as obsidian, snaked across the surface of the shield. The light flickered wildly, and the singers cried out as if wounded themselves. Just as the fracture began to spread, a deep, resonant chime echoed from the depths of the city, a clear, pure note that cut through the chaos. It came from the heart chamber. The great crystal, now fully charged with the city's reawakened power, was ready. The crack in the dome widened, a jagged scar of nothingness through which a chilling silence began to pour. Elara's mind, honed by years of deciphering patterns, saw the truth with terrible clarity. They were losing. The collective song was a magnificent defense, but it was a shield against an ocean. They needed a weapon. Her eyes were drawn upward, through the crystalline ceiling of the chamber, to the faint, remembered pinpricks of starlight in the sky above the mountain. The star chart that had led her here flashed in her memory, its coded pathways not just for navigation, but for channeling a specific, celestial energy. A desperate, terrifying idea ignited within her. She turned to the Council of Elders, their faces etched with the strain of centuries. "We must use the light they fear most," she said, her voice cutting through the din. "We can overload the heart crystal with pure starlight. It would create a blast wave to scour the eclipse from the sky." The silence that followed was heavier than the battle outside. The eldest among them, a woman with eyes that held the memory of the first sunset, spoke the terrible cost. To channel that much power would drain the city's core. The heart crystal would shatter. Ethelgard would fall silent again, perhaps forever. "It is a choice between existence and extinction," the elder said, her gaze holding Elara's. "We choose to live, even if that life is a dream," the council agreed. The order was given, and the city's energy, so recently awakened, was now deliberately funneled back into the heart chamber, preparing for one final, suicidal surge. Elara watched the preparations, a cold dread settling in her stomach. Her quest for discovery had brought them to this precipice. She had awakened this wonder, only to be the one to command its return to sleep. The weight of that irony was a stone in her heart, but she would not ask others to pay a price she was unwilling to pay herself. "I have a bond with the heart, through the seed," she told the elders. "I can act as a conduit, a guide for the energy. I can stabilize the flow long enough for the blast to form." Riven grabbed her arm, his fear for her plain on his face. "You will be at the center of the explosion. The feedback could unravel you." She met his gaze, her own resolve steady. "Some truths are worth any risk." "This is mine." As the eclipse finally shattered the dome and poured into the city, in a wave of devouring shadow, Elara stepped into the heart chamber. The air crackled with gathered power. She placed her hands on the blazing crystal, and the world dissolved into a searing white radiance. In that moment, she was not just Elara. She was every citizen singing in the streets, every stone of the ancient architecture, every whispered hope and silent fear. She felt the entirety of Ethelgard, a single, brilliant note held against the endless dark, just as the shadows reached for her. The world became pure, searing whiteness. Elara was no longer a woman, but a vessel a channel for the hopes of an entire civilization and the raw power of the stars. She felt the city's energy, the frantic song of its people, and the ancient strength of the heart crystal, all surging through her, a river of light, so immense it threatened to tear her very essence apart. In that final, critical moment, as the eclipse reached for her with tendrils of absolute nothingness, she made a choice not of vengeance, but of compassion. She did not force the energy into a weapon of pure destruction. Instead, she let it flow through her with the gentleness of a dawn breeze, a wave of cleansing, healing light that expanded from the city in a silent, blinding dawn. The shadowy forms of the eclipse did not scream as they were unmade. They simply dissolved, their chilling silence replaced by a profound and ringing peace. The light washed over the broken dome, knitting the fractures back together with threads of radiance, and flowed through the streets, mending scarred stone and revitalizing the weary citizens. The city was saved, standing whole and impossibly bright against the mountain walls, but the cost was immediate. The great heart crystal at the center of it all dimmed, its brilliant lattice fading to a dull, dormant gray, its energy utterly spent. And Elara, her purpose fulfilled, felt her physical form begin to fray at the edges, fading like mist in the new sun. She had anchored the storm, and it had consumed her. It was Riven, shouting her name, who fought through the dissipating energy to reach her. He ignored the searing pain in his own hands as he grasped her fading shoulders, pulling her back from the torrent with all his strength, breaking her connection to the crystal just as her form threatened to vanish entirely. She collapsed into his arms, unconscious but solid once more, her last conscious act having been one of healing, not harm. She awoke days later to the gentle light of a real sun. She was in a quiet room, its window looking out over a city, alive with activity. Ethelgard's graceful spires reached for an open sky, no longer encased in mountain stone. Its people moved through the streets with a new purpose, their faces no longer etched with the fear of the eclipse, but with a different, more complex anxiety. They were free, permanently awakened, but the heart crystal slept. The city could no longer hide, its protective veil gone forever. Their sanctuary was now just a city, vulnerable and exposed to the wider world they had fled so long ago. The sunlight felt strange and wonderful on her skin, after a lifetime of inked parchment and lamplight. Elara's recovery was slow, but her mind was a whirlwind of activity. With the city's scholars, she began the greatest project of her life, creating the first true map of a world that now included Ethelgard. They worked in a sun-drenched scriptorium, her precise lines charting the revealed valleys and rivers, while the scholars provided the deep, contextual knowledge of the land's hidden energies and ancient histories. This was not just a geographical record, it was a bridge. The map became the foundation for a formal accord, a treaty of shared knowledge and mutual protection between the Awakened City and the Cartographers Guild. Elara, the woman once on the verge of expulsion, was now the chief architect of a new era. Ethelgard blossomed into a breathtaking center of learning, its crystalline libraries and advanced philosophies, drawing curious minds from distant lands. In her homeland, songs were sung of the cartographer who found a lost city and saved it from shadow. Yet within the city's luminous walls, a quiet conflict simmered. A faction of citizens, their fear forged by the memory of the eclipse, saw every outsider as a potential invader. They argued for strict isolation, for rebuilding the shield at any cost. Another group, led by forward-thinking scholars, believed their long sleep was meant to end with sharing their wisdom to elevate the entire world. Elara found herself not just a hero, but a mediator, using her unique position as both an insider and an outsider to soothe tensions and build trust. The weight of the decision settled on her quietly one evening as she looked from a balcony over the glowing city. Her old life, the guild halls, the familiar streets, all of it felt like a story she had read long ago. Here, in this city of rediscovered wonders, she had a purpose that went beyond discovery. She was a living link, and so she made her choice, sending a formal declaration to the guild that she would remain in Ethelgard as its head archivist and permanent ambassador. It was a decision that cemented her new identity and ensured a lasting peace, but it carried a quiet, personal sorrow. She was choosing a future here, knowing it likely meant she would never walk the cobbled streets of her homeland again. The first official cultural exchange was a day of vibrant celebration. The air buzzed with a mixture of languages, and the vibrant colors of guild robes contrasted with Ethelgard's flowing silvers. And then she saw him, moving through the crowd with a familiar, measured grace was Master Kale. His eyes found hers across the courtyard, and he approached, his expression impossible to read. The noise of the festival seemed to fade around them as he stopped before her. "Elara," he said, his voice low, "a word in private, if you would." The festival's distant music felt a world away in the sudden silence between them. Master Kale led Elara to a quiet alcove overlooking the city's central library, the lines on his face deepened by the soft, crystalline light. He did not speak for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the spires as if seeing a ghost. "I try to find this place," he finally said, his voice stripped of its usual authority, revealing a raw old ache. "Decades ago, with a map I believed was the key. I failed." His confession hung in the air, a seismic shift in everything Elara thought she knew about him. He had not been merely a bureaucrat obsessed with order. He had been a dreamer whose dreams had curdled into regret. He saw my fire, my obsession, and it terrified him. Elara realized he was not trying to stifle discovery. He was trying to protect me from his own heartbreak. From a leather satchel, he produced a bundle of journals, their covers worn soft with age. He pressed them into her hands. "I buried these," he admitted, his tone a mix of shame and relief. "I convinced myself the quest was a folly, that some mysteries are meant to stay lost. You proved me wrong." His motives were a tangled knot, impossible to separate. There was genuine pride in her accomplishment, a scholar's awe at the knowledge she had unveiled, but woven through it was the sharp thread of jealousy, the painful sight of someone achieving the very thing he had surrendered. And beneath it all, a desperate, aching desire for redemption. Elara accepted the journals, feeling the profound weight they carried. They were not just paper and ink, they were a man's lost youth, his abandoned hope. In that moment, she understood that her journey had never been just about her own ambition. It had become a beacon, forcing others to confront the paths they had left untraveled. Her discovery of Ethelgard was not an end, but a catalyst, the first thread pulled in a much larger tapestry of lost realms waiting to be found. She saw an opportunity, not just to accept a gift, but to heal an old wound. "We need your experience, Master Kale," she said, her voice firm yet gentle. Not your suspicion, but your understanding. Stay, serve as an advisor to the city you once sought. The offer hung in the air, a chance to transform a potential rival into a powerful ally. It was a risk, inviting the old guard into the heart of the new, but it was a risk built on the belief that shared purpose could mend old failures. Kale's stern facade finally crumbled, and he gave a slow, grateful nod. The partnership was sealed, merging her groundbreaking discovery with his decades of accumulated, if dormant, wisdom. This new alliance immediately raised the stakes, transforming a single miraculous find into the first chapter of a grander, more dangerous endeavor. The secrets of other lost realms would now be actively pursued, each one guarded by its own unique perils and ancient sentinels. As Kale settled into his new role within the archives, he unrolled one of his own old maps across a reading table. His finger, now touched with a renewed energy, traced a path across the parchment before stopping on a specific, intricate constellation. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper filled with a rekindled wonder. They spoke of a city that never touches the earth, he murmured, his eyes gleaming. A realm of winds and whispers, hidden among the perpetual clouds. Its location is a riddle written in the sky itself, a mystery that has waited for a seeker brave enough to listen. The air in Ethelgard grew thick and heavy, a palpable stillness that made every breath feel like a conscious effort. The sky, once a brilliant, welcoming blue, now churned with clouds the color of tarnished copper, tinged with an unsettling emerald glow. The city's newly installed atmospheric sensors, a blend of surface technology and salvaged Aethelgardian crystals, began chiming in a frantic, discordant chorus, their readings spiking off the charts. They detected a colossal energy signature coalescing high above, a swirling vortex of power that dwarfed anything in their records. Elara and Riven stood on an observation platform, their faces illuminated by the eerie light. They consulted a chaotic mix of sources, her new maps spread beside his notes on magical theory and the city's own ancient meteorological logs. The pieces clicked together with a dreadful certainty. The defeat of the Eclipse had not been a clean victory. It had been a rupture. The void's sudden absence had left a vacuum in the world's magical equilibrium, and the delicate systems that govern the skies were now spiraling out of control. Elara remembered Master Kale's whispered words about the City of Winds, a realm woven from air and energy. It was not just a legend, it was a crucial part of this balance, and it was now critically unstable. Panic began to ripple through the streets below. Citizens who had just begun to believe in their newfound safety looked up at the threatening sky, their hard-won confidence crumbling. The city's fledgling defenses, still recovering from the previous battle, were utterly unequipped to handle a threat of this magnitude. It was not an army at the gates, but the very atmosphere turning against them. Waiting for the storm to break would be suicide. Elara's decision was immediate and firm. "We cannot weather this storm," she told the council, her voice cutting through the anxious murmurs. "We must find its source. I will lead an expedition to trace this energy to its origin. It is the only way to restore the balance and save our home." Her declaration was met with fear and protest, but also with a grim understanding. The stability of the entire region, perhaps the whole continent, now hung in the balance. A storm of this magical magnitude would not just level Ethelgard, It would scour the land for leagues in every direction, leaving nothing but a magical wasteland. Their preparations were a frantic race against the darkening sky. In one of the cities, grand hangars, engineers, and artisans worked together, retrofitting a lightweight Ethelgardian skiff with reinforced enchantments and surface world navigation gear. It was a strange, beautiful hybrid of two worlds, their last, best hope. As the final preparations were made and Elara and Riven boarded the vessel, the first bolt of lightning struck. It was not a jagged fork of white, but a solid, searing lance of viridian energy that slammed into the mountainside with a deafening crack of thunder. In the afterglow of that blinding flash, for just a fraction of a second, the clouds above seemed to part, and there, silhouetted against the raging tempest, they saw it. Not a city of stone, but a collection of floating islands, their edges sharp and broken, draped with the haunting, tangled ruins of a civilization that had learned to live among the clouds. The ascent was a violent, shuddering climb into chaos. The hybrid skiff bucked and groaned as it fought its way upward, its hull screaming against hurricane-force winds that seemed intent on crushing them back to Earth. Through the crystalline viewport, the world below vanished into a churning sea of green-tinged cloud, while all around them, lances of viridian lightning exploded with deafening roars, each strike a potential death sentence. Elara clung to a console, her knuckles white, her mind a single, focused point, navigating the treacherous energy currents. Beside her, Riven and the Ethelgardian engineers worked frantically, channeling power to the stabilizers and reinforcing the protective wards that flickered like dying embers around the ship. It was a battle of inches and seconds, a desperate gamble against a sky that had gone mad. Their destination, the floating ruins of Zephyria, materialized through the storm like the bones of a colossal beast. The islands were jagged and broken, their architecture all sweeping arches and delicate, wind-sculpted towers now crumbling into nothingness. There was no sign of life, only the mournful howl of the gale through empty streets and shattered windows. Finding a stable docking point was a miracle of piloting. The skiff, latching onto a massive, moss-covered landing platform that groaned under the sudden weight. The moment the hatch hissed open, the true hostility of the environment assaulted them. A sudden microburst of wind nearly ripped two engineers from their feet, saved only by the quick, solid grasp of the stone guardians who anchored themselves to the stone. The very ground seemed to shift, chunks of rock calving away from the islands to plummet into the abyss below. The air was thin and biting cold, and every step was a calculated risk against an unpredictable and violent landscape. They were standing in a tomb, suspended in the sky, and the clock was ticking. The energy readings from the storm below were spiking toward a catastrophic level. "We have to split up," Elara shouted over the gale, her voice strained but decisive. "We cover more ground this way. Find the central power source, the heart of this place. It is our only chance." It was a terrible risk, dividing their strength in such a lethal environment, but the alternative, a slow, methodical search, was a luxury they did not have. She trusted the Guardian's resilience and the engineer's quick wits, but the fear of losing anyone in this desolate place was a cold knot in her stomach. Teams fanned out, moving cautiously across swaying rope bridges and through cavernous, derelict halls, where ancient tapestries flapped like frantic ghosts. Elara and Riven, with two guardians, pressed on toward the tallest structure, a central tower that speared into the heart of the storm. Inside, the howl of the wind faded to a resonant hum. The chamber was vast and circular, and at its center hung the source of Zephyrria's ancient power, a massive crystal orb, easily twice the height of a man. But it was a heartbreaking sight. A web of deep fractures marred its surface, and its light, which should have been a steady, brilliant white, was faint and guttering, flickering like a dying candle. And they were not alone. Ethereal, wind-like entities swirled around the dying heart, formless and silent. They were not attacking the crystal, but rather flowing into its cracks, drinking deeply from its diminishing energy. With every pulse they absorbed, the orb dimmed further, and the storm outside seemed to gain a fresh, furious strength. These were not guardians. They were parasites, feeding on the city's death throes and fueling the cataclysm growing below. The wind entities were not parasites, but prisoners, as the harmonic frequencies from Ethelgard's sonic device washed over them, their formless wailing coalesced into a chorus of distinct, heartbroken voices. They were the weeping winds, the spirits of Zephyria's people, their essence trapped in an endless loop of the moment their city fell. Their grief was not feeding the storm, it was the storm. A single, clear voice rose above the others, whispering of a trusted guardian, a being of stone and sky, who had been entrusted with the city's central crystal. In a moment of catastrophic failure, its focus had faltered, and the resulting energy surge had unraveled the very magic that held the islands aloft, scattering their physical forms to the wind and binding their spirits to the dying heart. They were not malevolent, they were simply broken, their despair unconsciously draining the last of the city's power to sustain their own sorrowful existence. The team was not facing an enemy, but a tragedy. Riven watched the swirling, tormented spirits, his healer's soul recoiling from their profound pain. "You cannot fight a wound," he said softly, his eyes meeting Elara's. "You can only try to heal it." He proposed a desperate, gentle plan, to use the luminous seeds stabilizing energy as a conduit, not for power, but for peace. He would weave a healing melody, one of release and solace, and channel it through the seed directly into the crystal's core. It was a profound risk, requiring them to open their own emotions to the spirit's bottomless grief, to empathize without being consumed. To fail meant their own hope would be extinguished, swallowed by the anguish of 1,000 lost souls, and the resulting emotional backlash would shatter the heart crystal for good. But to succeed was to offer a long-delayed mercy. Elara nodded, her trust in him absolute. She held the seed against the cold, fractured surface of the great orb as Riven began to sing. His voice was not loud, but it was impossibly clear, a simple, ancient melody of letting go. As the first notes filled the tower, a profound shift occurred. The frantic shrieking of the winds softened into a sigh. The violent swirling of the spirits slowed, their forms becoming more distinct, almost humanoid for a fleeting moment. Deep within the cracked crystal, a single, steady point of light began to glow, no longer flickering. For the first time in centuries, silence began to descend upon Zephyria. But in the newfound quiet, from the deepest, darkest ruin of the central tower, something else responded to the song. A low, grinding tremor shook the floor, and a shadow detached itself from the far wall, a hulking, silent form of dark stone that turned with a ponderous, deliberate slowness, its own single, baleful eye flickering to life. The failed guardian had awakened. A low growl echoed from the stone guardian, a sound of grinding rock and ancient fury. The failed protector did not advance. Instead, it raised a single, massive hand, and the shadows around it coalesced into a shimmering, humanoid form, a spectral mage whose face was a mask of bitter pride and profound sorrow. This was the betrayer's echo, the lingering will of the mage whose lapse had doomed his home. He had clung to this half-life for centuries, and he would not allow his failure to be undone, his eternal punishment to end. "You seek to silence my grief," the entity hissed, its voice the sound of a gale through a narrow canyon. "You will share it instead." The echo did not attack with raw force. It struck with memories. A wave of disorienting power washed over them. For Riven, the tower vanished, replaced by a vision of Elara turning from him, her eyes cold with dismissal, telling him his simple ways had no place in this new world of wonders. For Elara, she saw her maps crumbling to dust, heard the laughter of the Cartographer's guild as Master Kale declared her a fraud who had only ever stumbled upon luck. The stone guardians froze, their programming conflicted by illusions of their own creators, commanding them to stand down. The healing melody faltered, Riven's voice catching in his throat as his deepest insecurity gripped his heart. With their concentration broken, the weeping winds, who had begun to calm, wailed in fresh agony. The storm below responded in kind. A tremendous fork of emerald lightning slammed into Ethelgard's protective dome, and the entire floating island shuddered violently, chunks of its edge shearing away into the void. They were being torn apart from the inside and the outside simultaneously. Elara fought against the vision, pushing back the imagined scorn with the memory of Riven's steadfast loyalty. She saw her team scattered and isolated, each trapped in a private nightmare, and she understood. He feeds on what separates us, she realized, her own fear hardening into resolve. Our unity is his weakness. She did not shout a command. She began to hum their melody again, a fragile but determined sound against the psychic assault. Then she reached out, her hand finding Riven's arm, breaking the illusion's hold on him. "Link up," she cried out, her voice cutting through the dissonance. "All of you now." It was a physical and emotional act of defiance. One by one, they broke from their personal torments. Riven placed his hand on a stone guardian's arm. The engineer gripped his colleague's shoulder, and together they formed a chain, a circuit of shared strength. The healing song swelled, no longer a single voice but a chorus, their combined will reinforcing the melody and pushing back against the echo's influence. The betrayer shrieked in frustration, its form flickering. "You leave me no legacy but ash," it roared. "If I cannot rule this ruin, then no one will." It threw its remaining power not at them, but at the fractured heart crystal, aiming to overload its fragile stability and trigger a chain reaction that would vaporize the entire floating city. But as the entity made its final, desperate move, the heart crystal of Zephyria, now resonating with the team's unified song, pulsed with a light of pure, untarnished gold. The city's own ancient defenses, dormant for centuries, flared to life. Arcane patterns glowed on the walls and floor, and beams of concentrated sunlight lanced from the ceiling, not aimed at the team, but at the betrayer's echo, pinning the spectral mage in a cage of brilliant, cleansing energy. The entity screamed as the city's ancient defenses held it fast, a prisoner of the light it had once betrayed. Its final, desperate lunge for the crystal was a blur of spectral malice, but Riven was faster. He threw himself into the path of the attack, a shield of flesh and bone against the last gasp of a dying sorrow. The impact was not a sound, but a sickening absence of one, a silent concussion of force that sent him stumbling back, his face pale with shock. Elara's heart screamed at her to go to him, to help her friend, but her hands were already pressed against the crystal, the luminous seed, flaring with the unified hope of their entire team. She made the agonizing choice to trust the city's restored guardians, to focus every ounce of her will on the delicate, intricate work of sealing the fractures in the heart of Zephyria. It was a terrible gamble, but the only one that could save them all, as the last crack sealed with a sound like a perfect musical note. A wave of pure, calm energy erupted from the orb. It was a clean wind, scented with rain-washed stone and a promise of dawn, and it washed through the tower and out across the floating islands. The weeping winds, touched by this gentle power, did not scream or vanish. Their forms softened, their anguish lifting as they transformed into peaceful, shimmering breezes that sighed with relief before gently dispersing, their long torment finally over. Far below, the emerald storm began to unravel, its furious clouds dissolving into harmless mist under a returning sun, but the victory was bittersweet. As the light in the tower settled into a steady, brilliant glow, Elara rushed to Riven's side. He was conscious, but a strange, cold energy flickered around a wound on his arm, a lingering echo of the entity's despair. The personal cost of their mission was now a chill in his veins, a stark reminder that every saved city left its scars. With the immediate threat gone, a profound change took hold of Zephyria. The grinding of stone ceased as the island stabilized, their broken edges smoothing as if being gently carved by an invisible hand. Then, with a deep, resonant hum, the entire city began to move, drifting not aimlessly, but with clear and deliberate purpose on the calm air, its trajectory set on a gentle course toward the mountains that cradled Ethelgard. The first lost city had been found underground, the second saved in the sky, and now an aerial alliance was born from the stillness after the storm. The first joint council meeting was held in a newly constructed spire that bridged the sky and earth, its central chamber open to the winds. There, leaders from Ethelgard and Zephyria signed the Ethereal Accord, a formal pact of mutual protection and shared knowledge. Elara and Riven stood quietly to the side as they were honored not as heroes, but as the architects of this fragile peace. The moment was one of profound hope, a testament to what could be built from the ruins of two separate tragedies. The immediate benefits were tangible. Ethelgardian sonic technology was woven into Zephyria's wind channels, creating shimmering, combined barriers that could deflect both physical and magical assaults. In return, Zephyrian techniques for cultivating flora in thin air and harvesting atmospheric moisture revolutionized agriculture in the mountain city, turning barren terraces into lush, hanging gardens. It was a beautiful, practical symbiosis, yet beneath the surface, discontent simmered. A faction of Ethelgardians, led by a stern archivist named Loras, argued that their city was diluting its ancient heritage with what he called sky-born frivolities. Across the table, a Zephyrien elder named Kale voiced a mirror fear, worrying that their delicate, wind-sculpted culture would be crushed by the weight of earth-bound tradition and resource demands. They saw the rapid exchange not as enrichment, but as a loss of identity, a precursor to conflict. Elara listened to these fears, recognizing the valid anxieties behind the resistance. She proposed a solution not of force, but of inclusion. "We will form a permanent joint council," she announced to the gathered leaders, "and we will ensure that every voice, especially those of dissent, has a seat at the table. Change will not be a flood, but a carefully guided river." Her decision was a gamble on the slow, difficult work of trust. The stakes of this union could not be higher. Its success would prove that disparate lost realms could unite, creating a network of knowledge and strength capable of facing any ancient threat. Its failure, however, would breed an internal strife that could shatter both cities from within, leaving them vulnerable and isolated once more. As the first official council meeting drew to a close, debating the nuances of shared resource allocation, a junior technician rushed into the chamber, his face pale. "A signal," he stammered, placing a crystal communicator on the central table. "It is on a loop, encrypted with a cipher we have never seen." From the device, a faint, rhythmic pulse emitted a series of sharp clicks and watery chimes. The technician played a filtered version, and a voice, distorted by immense pressure and distance, broke through. It spoke only 3 words before repeating. "The abyss calls." The rhythmic clicks and watery chimes from the communicator became an obsession. Elara worked through the night, cross-referencing the signal with aquatic dialects found in Ethelgard's oldest archives. The message was a desperate plea, a repeating loop from a city named Mariana, an aquatic realm whose life support dome had been breached. Its oxygen levels were falling, its people drowning in their own home. There was no time for debate. Elara immediately mobilized a hybrid rescue team, combining Ethelgard's most brilliant engineers with Zephiria's swift, agile scouts, who could navigate treacherous fluid dynamics. Their confirmation of the signal's origin was a chilling success, a pinprick of hope in a vast, dark ocean, but reaching it meant descending into a world of crushing pressure and territorial leviathans. Every minute of deliberation was a minute Mariana did not have. Elara made the difficult choice to lead the mission herself. She was no submariner. Her expertise lay in maps and diplomacy, but she believed that gaining the trust of an isolated, desperate people would require a familiar face, a hand extended in peace, not just a team of technicians. The stakes were absolute: the loss of an entire city and its culture, a silent genocide in the deep, and a darker question loomed: was the breach a tragic failure of ancient technology, or was it a deliberate act of sabotage? As their newly crafted submersible craft descended into the lightless, pressurized depths, the external lights illuminated only a swirling, particulate gloom. Then the sonar console chimed softly, painting a terrifying image on its screen. Large, intelligent shapes were moving around them, circling just beyond the light's reach, their forms too structured to be mere fish and too organic to be machine. The shapes resolved from the gloom, becoming a patrol of Merfolk guardians. Their forms were sleek and powerful, woven from muscle and iridescent scale, and they moved with a terrifying grace. They did not attack with teeth or claws, but with the ocean itself summoning controlled currents that slammed into the submersible and disorienting sonic pulses that rattled the hull. They saw the vessel not as a rescue craft, but as an invasion from the world that had forgotten them. Thinking quickly, Elara activated the external display, projecting the combined symbol of the Ethelgard Zephyria Accord, a crystalline spire embraced by a swirling wind, into the dark water. It was a gesture of unity, a language of peace they hoped would transcend centuries of silence. The assault ceased. The lead guardian, a formidable figure with a crown of living coral, approached the viewport. Her eyes, large and luminous, studied the symbol, then the faces behind the crystal. She gestured with a webbed hand, and the patrol fell into a formation around them, becoming a silent, wary escort into the abyss. They were granted passage, but not trust. The Merfolk were a proud people, their isolation a deliberate shield. They demanded proof of this sudden, surface-dwelling goodwill, their suspicion as thick and cold as the deep-sea pressure. Riven understood that words were meaningless here. He saw a younger guardian, nursing a badly infected gash on his flank, a wound that pulsed with a sickly phosphorescence. Without asking permission, Riven opened his medical kit. He gestured to the injury, then to his supplies, his movements slow and deliberate. The elders watched, their expressions unreadable, as he applied a poultice of purified kelp and Ethelgardian antiseptic crystals. The practical compassion of the act, the visible relief on the young guardian's face, began to dissolve the rigid walls of mistrust far more effectively than any promise or plea. This fragile cooperation was their only hope, for the city of Mariana was dying before their eyes. They passed through the city's failing energy membrane and into a breathtaking world of bioluminescent architecture and soaring, water-filled avenues. The scale of the damage was staggering. A massive, jagged crack ran across the great dome, a weeping wound through which a relentless, high-pressure jet of water streamed, flooding the lower districts. The Merfolk elders, their faces etched with a grief as deep as their home, revealed the terrible truth. The breach was not an accident of failing technology. It was the work of a void beast, a creature of the abyssal trench that slumbered far below, whose restless turnings had cracked their world like an eggshell. The descent into the trench was a journey into an alien world of crushing silence and absolute blackness. Their submersible's lights carved a frail tunnel through the void, illuminating nothing but drifting sediment and the occasional, bizarre life form that flickered and vanished. The pressure was a physical presence, a giant's hand squeezing the hull, and every creak of metal was a reminder of their profound fragility. Then they saw it. The void beast was not a monster of tooth and scale, but a Leviathan of living shadow and light, its form a constantly shifting nebula of dark matter and faint, hungry bioluminescence. It moved with a slow, disoriented grace, its immense bulk brushing against the canyon walls and sending tremors through the water. It was not attacking. It was searching, its movements those of a creature starving and lost. The Merfolk warriors readied their sonic lances, their instincts screaming to drive the beast away or kill it. But Elara saw the truth in its languid, desperate circling. This was not a malevolent force, it was a symptom. Its natural prey, the great schools of luminous, energy-rich plankton that once filled these depths, were gone, their migration patterns altered by shifts in the ocean currents. The beast was simply following the last vestiges of warmth and energy, which had led it directly to Mariana's own power grid. A direct confrontation would be suicide. The creature's sheer size meant any aggressive action would be like poking a sleeping giant, provoking a defensive rage that would surely finish the job of crushing the city. They needed a solution that addressed the cause, not the symptom. Elara made the call. "We do not fight it," she said, her voice calm but firm over the comms. "We feed it." She ordered the engineers to reconfigure their equipment, using Ethelgard's harmonic emitters to project a complex sonic and light pattern into the water, a perfect simulation of the beast's lost food source. It was a desperate gamble, a gentle lie told to a primordial force. For a long, tense moment, the beast seemed not to notice, continuing its slow, tragic circuit. Then, one of its great, light siphon appendages twitched. It turned its nebulous form, not with aggression, but with a dawning, instinctual curiosity. It drifted toward the projection, and as it began to draw the simulated energy into itself, a deep, resonant hum of contentment vibrated through the submersible, a sound of profound relief. Slowly, surely, the colossal creature allowed itself to be led, turning away from the city and moving deeper into the trench, following the phantom feast. As it shifted, the disturbed silt settled to reveal what its massive body had concealed for millennia. Carved into the sheer wall of the trench was an ornate gateway, its archway sealed with a colossal, barnacle-encrusted door made of a pearlescent material that glowed with a soft, internal light. The intricate patterns on its surface were unmistakably a form of writing, a language of the deep that promised answers to questions they had not yet even learned to ask. The pearlescent door glowed in the abyssal dark, its surface alive with symbols that told the oldest story of all. Elara's breath caught as she recognized the patterns from the most fragmented and theoretical scrolls in Ethelgard's deepest archives. This was not merely a ruin, it was the mythic first city, the whispered origin point from which all other lost civilizations had sprung. As their submersible drew closer, the water itself began to hum, a deep, resonant vibration that they felt in their bones. The gateway was not just sealed, it was holding back an immense, contained power, and it was beginning to stir from its long slumber. The pieces of a terrifying puzzle clicked into place. Mariana was never meant to be a standalone city. It was a guardian outpost, its entire purpose to watch over this submerged threshold. The Void Beast's attack was not a random tragedy. It was a consequence, a symptom of the gateway's growing instability as it awakened. The very ground shake that cracked their dome was an echo from this deeper, more profound disturbance. Back within Mariana's fragile biosphere, this revelation split the Merfolk Council in two. One faction, led by a fiery commander named Neri, saw the gateway as their birthright, a chance to reclaim the primeval glory of their ancestors and lead a new age. The other, led by the cautious elder who had first greeted them, feared it was a seal, a prison door holding back a hunger that could consume the oceans. Their ancient ballads spoke of a choice between a lost dawn and an endless night, and now that choice was upon them. Amidst the rising tension, Elara's voice was a steadying force. "We stand at a threshold none of us truly understand," she told the divided council. "To rush forward is as dangerous as to turn away. I propose we do not act as rivals, but as scholars." Let us form a united research initiative, a confluence of the best minds from Ethelgard, Zephyria, and Mariana. We must learn what this is before we decide what to do with it. Her proposal was a thread of reason in a fabric of fear and ambition. The stakes of a wrong decision were unimaginably high. The gateway could hold the ultimate secrets of their world's creation, the lost history of every civilization. But it could just as easily be the lock on a door that should never be opened, and tampering with it could trigger a cataclysm that would ripple across the entire globe, affecting every continent and every life. The first step was to listen, as engineers from all three cities worked together to install delicate monitoring equipment around the pearlescent arch. The gateway responded. It pulsed once, a wave of light so intense it illuminated the entire trench for a single, breathtaking second. Then, from its center, a complex holographic map bloomed into the water, shimmering like a constellation made of liquid light. It showed their world, but not as they knew it. Dotting the continents and oceans were points of brilliant light, each one marking the location of a lost city, with lines of energy connecting them all back to this single, central point in the deep. The first city was not just a legend, it was the heart of a hidden world. The great hall was filled with a current of mingled hope and fear. Elara stood before representatives from three worlds, the air humming with the low thrum of Ethelgard's crystals, the soft sigh of Zephyrian wind chimes, and the watery resonance of Mariana's translators. This was the first Council of Realms, a gathering born from desperation and discovery. They pooled their histories, their oldest songs and most secret archives, and a single, staggering truth emerged. The first city was not a myth. It was a seed, a perfect, unified civilization that had, in a forgotten age, shattered like a dropped crystal, its fragments scattering across the globe to become the very cities now seated at this table. The gateway in the trench was not a door, but a lock, designed to be opened only when all the pieces were brought back together, using unique keys safeguarded by each descendant city. This revelation split the council in two. Neri of Mariana saw a destiny to be seized, a chance to restore a golden age and wield the power of their ancestors. The Zephyrians, their culture born from fragility, warned of a power too great to control, a force that had already proven it could shatter worlds. The Ethelgardians were divided, caught between their thirst for ultimate knowledge and their memory of the Eclipse. The debate was a storm of what-ifs and fears, each valid, each terrifying. Elara listened until the arguments began to circle, then she spoke into the tension. "We do not gather the keys to open the lock," she proposed, her voice a calm center in the storm. "We gather them to have the choice. We seek them to understand what we are protecting, or what we are preventing. Only when every city agrees, when we are united in purpose and prepared for any consequence, do we even consider turning the first key." Her compromise was a profound act of trust, a promise to journey together without a guarantee of the destination. It required each city to surrender its individual claim to the ultimate decision. After a long, heavy silence, the accord was struck. The stakes of this new quest were immense. The keys were not mere artifacts. They were part of the gateway's living defense system. A single key, retrieved carelessly, could trigger ancient safeguards or send a pulse of energy into the world, a beacon for any other beings who had hunted for the first city across the millennia. Their search would have to be as silent as it was swift. The combined archives quickly identified the location of the first key. It was held in the forged city of Ignis, a realm built within the heart of a supervolcano, a place of fire and ash where the very air could burn, and the ground was a treacherous crust over a lake of fire. The air in Ignis tasted of ash and scorched metal, a constant, gritty reminder of the inferno that powered the city, buried deep within the supervolcano. Rivers of molten rock flowed through channels in the blackened ground, their heat a physical force that pressed against Elara's skin, even through her protective gear. The team, a small, diverse group from the 3 allied cities, moved with a shared tension, their every breath filtered through masks to guard against the toxic fumes that shimmered in the blistering air. This was not a city of stone or wind, but of fire and will, and its inhabitants reflected that brutal environment. The people of Ignis moved through the heat with an unnerving grace, their skin marked with faint, glowing patterns that pulsed in time with the lava flows, their eyes holding the steady, patient glow of embers. They had not merely adapted to the heat, they had become part of it, merging with the elemental fury of their home. These part elemental guardians did not attack, but they watched, their silent scrutiny more intimidating than any drawn weapon. They guided the newcomers to a vast, circular chamber, dominated by a colossal forge, its heart a contained star of pure heat. The trial was not a puzzle to solve, but a test of being. The air itself became the first challenge, growing so thick with heat and pressure that each inhalation was a battle, sapping their strength and clouding their thoughts. The ground beneath their feet shifted unpredictably, forcing them into a constant, exhausting dance to avoid sinking into patches of superheated crust. It was a deliberate assault on their endurance, designed to break their bodies and expose the weakness in their spirits. Riven's knowledge of pressure points and energy flow became crucial as he helped the others regulate their breathing and conserve their waning strength, while the stone guardians from Ethelgard anchored themselves, providing stable handholds in the treacherous terrain. The true test came when the Forge Master, a being of living obsidian and simmering light, presented them with a choice. He gestured to a narrow, unstable bridge of black rock that spanned the widest lava river, leading directly to a pedestal where the key, a shard of solidified star metal, pulsed with a gentle inner fire. Then he pointed to a longer, winding path that descended deep into a labyrinth of geothermal vents, a route that promised even greater heat and unknown dangers, but which was the traditional, honorable way. One of the engineers, his face pale with heat exhaustion, argued for the direct route. "We have the strength to take it," he urged, his voice strained. "We risk everything for a principle," but Elara looked from the wary faces of the Ignis guardians to the key, understanding that this was not about speed, but about intent. To seize the key would be to declare themselves no better than thieves, validating every fear the isolated city held. To earn it would be to build a bridge. "We came here for an alliance, not a trophy," Elara stated, her voice raspy but firm. "We will walk the long path." Her decision resonated through the team, transforming their exhaustion into a shared purpose. The winding descent was a trial of fire and will, pushing them to their absolute limits, but they faced it together, helping each other through chambers of blistering steam and across plains of sharp, volcanic glass. When they finally emerged before the Forge Master once more, weary but unbroken, His stern expression shifted. He saw not conquerors, but worthy partners. He presented the key not as a prize, but as a trust. You carry the heart of our forge, he intoned. Do not let its light be extinguished by shadow. Their success had forged a powerful new ally in Ignis, bound by mutual respect. The victory, however, was shadowed. As they prepared for the arduous journey back to the surface, a Zephyrien scout, her senses attuned to minute vibrations in the air, reported a disturbing sight. Through the haze of volcanic smoke, she had glimpsed figures on a distant ridge, their armor sleek and uniform, their movements coldly efficient. They were not of Ignis, and they were not friendly. They were observers, a militaristic faction that had tracked them to this fiery heart, and their silent surveillance felt more threatening than any open attack. The process of earning the key honorably had taken precious time, and in that time they had been found. Carrying the weight of the star metal key and this new unease, the team returned to the submerged gateway. The tranquil, bioluminescent world of Mariana should have been a relief after the furnace of Ignis, but a new tension gripped the water. As their submersible settled before the glowing, pearlescent door, powerful lights snapped on, blinding them. Sleek, aggressive warships descended from above, surrounding them. On the main comms channel, a voice, sharp and devoid of emotion, broke the silence. You will surrender the keys, it demanded. The world does not need a new dawn. It needs order, and we are here to impose it. The voice on the comms was cold steel. The warships surrounding them were not of the deep or the sky, but of a stark, industrial surface world, their hulls bristling with technology designed to suppress magic. This was the Shadow faction, a coalition of exploiters who saw the gateway not as a mystery, but as the ultimate weapon for global conquest. Their leader, a man named Jax, made his demand again, his ships projecting disruptive frequency fields that made the water itself feel heavy and dead, causing the allied team's magical equipment to flicker and fail. The cooperative energy of the three cities wavered under this calculated assault. Jack's gambit was brutally simple. In the initial confusion, a precision magnetic grapple shot from one warship, snatching the star metal key from Ignis right out of their submersibles holding bay. He now held one of the sacred keys. Surrender the remaining two, he commanded, or I will use this one to force the gateway open. I would rather salvage a broken tool than share a perfect one. The Alliance was caught in a terrible standoff, their philosophy of unity clashing against a philosophy of absolute control. They could not win a direct fight against this technology, and violence would only confirm the faction's belief in domination. Elara watched the warships, her mind racing past the immediate threat to the deeper pattern. They are not monsters, she said to her team over their private channel. They are a reflection of the fear we are trying to heal. To fight them with force is to become them. She made a decision that stunned her allies. Opening a general channel, she spoke directly to Jax. Your way leads to ruin, for you and for everyone, but there is another path. Stand down, surrender the key, and you will have a seat on the Council of Realms. Your voice will help shape what comes next. The silence from the warship was profound. Her offer was a monumental risk, an attempt to integrate a poison into their body politic in the hope of neutralizing it. It legitimized their greed, yes, but it also offered them a stake in a future greater than their own ambition. Inside Jack's vessel, the temptation was real. A council seat meant influence, a share of the power, a victory without the bloodshed his investors would prefer, but his distrust was a deeply ingrained habit. "How can I trust to offer maid at gunpoint?" he countered, his voice a low growl. "For all I know, your counsel is a trap." As this dangerous negotiation teetered on a knife's edge, the gateway itself began to pass judgment. The pearlescent door, sensitive to the hostile intent and the conflicting energies around it, began to glow with an alarming, rhythmic intensity. Ancient scripts along its archway lit up in a sequence of red, and a low, resonant hum built into a deafening alarm that vibrated through the water. The Alliance archivists, monitoring the gateway's energy signature, realized the terrible truth with dawning horror. It was not opening, it was sealing itself. Interpreting the armed standoff as a catastrophic failure of the reconciliation process, the gateway's ancient safeguards had initiated an irreversible countdown to a permanent lockdown. The colossal door began to grind inward, and the water around it swirled into a violent vortex, threatening to crush their vessels and trap them all in a watery tomb. The water itself turned to solid light. A shimmering, impassable force field erupted from the gateway, encasing the Alliance submersibles and Jax's warships in a single, shared prison of radiant energy. The warship's disruptive technology sputtered and died, their aggressive hum replaced by the gateway's own deep, resonant tone. Then the visions began. They were not seen with the eyes, but felt in the soul, a direct transmission of historical truth. Every person trapped in that trench witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations built on domination, seeing empires of gleaming metal crumble into dust as their citizens turned on one another. They felt the scorching despair of a world stripped bare by greed. Jax recoiled as he saw his own ambition mirrored in the hollow eyes of a long-dead tyrant, his dream of order revealing its true face as a mask for control. Within his own ranks, soldiers lowered their weapons, their resolve shaken by the visceral, understanding that the path they were on led only to a silent, ashen end. For the Alliance, the visions were different. They saw the fragile beauty of Ethelgard's long sleep, the desperate courage of Zephyrria's fall, and the solemn duty of Mariana's vigil. Their own struggles were woven into a grander tapestry of sacrifice and preservation, strengthening their belief that their united way was not just one path, but the only path that led to a future worth having. The gateway was not merely showing them history, it was holding up a mirror to their souls, and the reflection was a brutal, honest test. Seeing the flicker of doubt in Jax's hardened expression, Elara knew this was the final, critical moment. She opened a channel to all ships, her voice stripped of all diplomacy, filled only with raw conviction. "I was a cartographer who believed a map was lines on parchment," she began, her words carrying the weight of her entire journey. "I learned that the most important territories are trust and fear. I crossed from a world of known shores into a wilderness of wonder, not by conquering it, but by learning its language. We stand where we began, at a threshold, but we do not have to be the conflict that seals this door forever. We can be the key that opens it, together." Her appeal was not a negotiation, but a confession of shared humanity. As she spoke of bridges built between earth and sky, fire and water, the gateway's furious light began to soften. The punishing hum mellowed into a gentle, questioning chime. The force field holding them prisoner dissolved into a harmless shimmer, then vanished entirely, leaving the warships and submersibles floating freely in the suddenly calm water. The gateway had rendered its judgment. It had found them worthy. In the silence that followed, the pearlescent door glowed with a soft, internal luminescence. The ancient scripts faded, and in their place, a new holographic map bloomed into the water. It was more complex than the last, a three-dimensional lattice of light connecting all the known cities. But now, from the central point in the trench, a single, brilliant pathway extended, diving deeper into the abyssal plane than any chart had ever recorded. It was a route, a clear and direct invitation to the heart of the mystery, the true location of the first city, revealed only to those who had chosen unity over conquest. The pearlescent gateway did not so much open as dissolve, its luminous substance flowing outward to form a tunnel of calm, shimmering water. It was a path that invited rather than commanded, and as the allied vessels moved forward, a profound understanding settled upon them. The portal was a filter of intent. Those who still held ambition for conquest felt an invisible, gentle pressure holding them back, a psychic barrier as soft and unyielding as a mother's embrace. Jack's warships, their aggressive posturing gone, were permitted to pass only after their crews, humbled by the gateway's judgment, formally swore allegiance to the new council. They crossed the threshold not as conquerors, but as penitents and partners. The first city materialized around them not as a ruin, but as a dream. It was a metropolis of impossible architecture, where buildings were grown from crystalline trees and streets were paved with light. The air was clean and carried the scent of ozone and blooming flora from another age. Everything was in a state of perfect, vibrant stasis, preserved not by sleep, but by a technology that had halted time itself. Libraries held tablets that glowed with living text, and workshops contained tools that seemed to anticipate their users' thoughts. This was not a tomb, but a university waiting for its first class, a legacy of harmony kept in trust for worthy heirs. Yet the city was not simply a gift to be claimed. As they ventured deeper, they encountered its final guardians. These were not warriors, but teachers. One presented a complex ethical dilemma involving resource allocation between three fictional societies, with no single correct answer, only a demand for a compromise that minimized suffering. Another guardian, a serene entity of light, asked each leader to confess their greatest fear about this new union, making their vulnerability the price of passage. The city was testing their wisdom and their capacity for justice, ensuring its new stewards would rule with empathy, not force. Standing in the city's central plaza, surrounded by the leaders of all the realms, Elara saw the true path forward. To claim this city for any single faction would be to repeat the very error that shattered the first civilization. She turned to the assembled council, her voice clear in the profound silence. This cannot belong to Ethelgard, or Zephyria, or any one of us, she declared. Let this be the capital of our Council of Realms, a neutral ground where all may come to learn, to govern, and to remember what we almost lost. Her proposal required a breathtaking surrender. It meant that no single city, not even her own, would hold sovereign control over the most powerful repository of knowledge in the world. After a moment of heavy contemplation, the leaders agreed, one by one, their ascent forging a new kind of sovereignty, built entirely on shared trust. This decision marked the dawn of a potential golden age, an era of enlightenment fueled by the first city's wisdom, but with it came a terrifying responsibility. They now held the power to reshape the world, and every decision they made would be scrutinized by history and by any other hidden powers that might covet what they had found. Their unity was their greatest strength, and now their most fragile asset. In the city's central archive, a hall of floating crystals that pulsed with soft light, they found the culmination of their journey. A holographic figure of one of the original founders materialized, her expression both proud and sorrowful. "You have passed our final test," she began, her voice echoing with the weight of eons. "But your work is not complete. Our civilization fell not to an external enemy, but because we created a system of power so centralized that it could only be held or seized. We broke ourselves. You have disrupted that cycle by choosing to share what we hoarded. Do not let your alliance become a new center. Let it remain a network, a constellation of equals. For the cycle of consolidation and collapse is a trap, and you have just taken the first step out of it." Her message was not a warning of a coming enemy, but a caution against the enemy within, the slow, creeping temptation of control that had doomed her own people. As her image faded, the crystals in the archive glowed brighter, fully activating, and the true, endless work of building a lasting peace began. The chamber was a symphony of silent potential. In its center, the core of the first city awaited, a perfect sphere of dormant crystal that reflected the faces of the 4 representatives gathered around it. There was no room for error. Elara stood at the Nexus, her hands resting on a central control panel that felt less like stone and more like a living heartbeat. The air grew heavy with the distinct energies of the 4 realms, the deep, patient hum of Ethelgard's earth, the whispering sigh of Zephyrria's wind, the fluid, rhythmic pulse of Mariana's water, and the fierce, contained heat of Ignis' fire. To combine them was to risk a cataclysm, a violent clash of opposing forces that could shatter the city and everyone in it. The final test was not one of strength, but of surrender. Each representative had to lower the innate defenses of their own power, allowing their unique signature to bleed into the collective stream, trusting that the others would do the same. It required a vulnerability that felt like stepping off a cliff. Elara closed her eyes, her mind becoming a living map of their intentions. She felt the flicker of doubt from the Ignis delegate, the ingrained caution of the Mariana elder, the fleeting instability of the Zephyrrian's focus. She did not command them. Instead, she wove their fears into the fabric of their shared purpose, her own unwavering belief in their unity, acting as the steady current that guided them. She was the cartographer of their collective spirit, drawing the lines of trust that connected their 4 separate worlds into one. And then it happened. The 4 streams of energy touched within the core. For a single, terrifying heartbeat, the sphere flared with chaotic color, a maelstrom of conflicting elements. But Elara's will held firm, a gentle, insistent pressure that soothed the turbulence. The energies did not fight. They danced. They wove together, earth giving foundation to wind, water tempering fire, until they became a single, radiant strand of pure, white light. The core ignited. It was not an explosion, but a dawn, a steady, Brilliant luminescence bloomed from the sphere, flooding the chamber with a warmth that felt like forgiveness. The light pulsed once, a gentle wave that flowed outward through the city's crystalline arteries, awakening long dormant systems. Towers that had stood in silent vigil for millennia began to glow with a soft, internal radiance. Fountains of light sprang from dry basins, and the very air seemed to clear, charged with a new and vibrant life. The light did not stop at the city's borders. It expanded in a silent, shimmering wave, flowing up through the ocean to touch the sky, a visible signal to the entire world that a fracture older than history had finally been mended. In that moment, Elara felt the last vestiges of her old self fall away. The young woman who had once risked everything to find a single lost city was gone. She was no longer just a seeker of places. She was a weaver of worlds, a guardian of the countless, fragile connections that now held the fate of a new era in a perfect, delicate balance. The gentle hum of the first city was a symphony of four worlds, a sound Elara once could not have even imagined. Standing on a high balcony, she looked out over a skyline where crystalline Ethelgardian spires rose beside Zephyrien wind-sculpted arches, all reflected in the tranquil canals maintained by Mariana's engineers and warmed by the deep, geothermal heart of Ignis. Her original map, the one that started it all, was now a single page in a vast, living atlas. She had set out to chart forgotten coastlines, but in the end, she had mapped something far more vital: the fragile, resilient connections between people. Each lost city she uncovered had been a lesson. Ethelgard taught her that preservation requires courage. Zephyria revealed that grief, left untended, can become a storm. Mariana showed that even the deepest isolation can be bridged by an outstretched hand, and Ignis proved that true strength is found not in taking the fastest path, but in walking the honorable one together. The cartographer who once sought a solitary truth now stood at the center of a thriving network, her life a testament to the fact that the greatest discoveries are not places, but possibilities. Of course, the map is never fully drawn. New stars appear in the sky, hinting at realms yet uncharted. Rumors whisper of a library buried in shifting sands and a citadel woven from living light. The work of stewardship is never finished, and peace is not a destination, but a continuous journey. But the foundation is unshakable. Whatever mysteries the horizon holds, they will be faced not by a lone seeker, but by a constellation of allies, their bonds the most accurate map Elara has ever created.